We're here with the Naples Daily News Editorial Board and Don Armstrong, a candidate for re-election to the Lee County School Board. Thank you, Don, for joining us.
My name is Don Armstrong. I'm currently a Lee County School Board member for District 4, and I'm up for re-election this year. I'm assuming you'd like a little information about me.
Yeah, and your background.
My background, I was born and raised on Pine Island, third generation Floridian. I have two 9-year-olds in the Lee County School District. They both go to North Myers Academy of the Arts, which I'm very proud of. Proud of my kids to do excellent in that school. It's an excellent, one of our top-notch schools. I'm a plumber by trade, which means I'm the common man. A little bit about my background without getting into many details. I'm the Cinderella story. Nobody thought I had a chance, even in life. I came up from a really bad background. Age 16, I was kicked out, lived on the streets, under a bridge. And I decided right then and there, I wasn't going to be a statistic. I was going to make something of myself. Got into plumbing at 20 years old, been doing it ever since. 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to be involved in my kids' education. And I started going to school board meetings, but I didn't like what I saw. I didn't like what I saw on TV. There's a lot of the stories. So I started attending more and more meetings and asking more questions. I realized they needed perspective, a different perspective on that board. From the average parent, just blue-collar worker. And I decided to run. Ever since I've been on the board, I've achieved a few different things. One of the things I've achieved was consolidating some of our bus stops in North Cape Coral, put them under street lights, and by doing this we shortened some of the bus routes. We could put more kids on the bus, and at the time I didn't know this, but this was brought to my attention down the road. By doing what we did, we saved almost $1 million off the transportation budget just by consolidating some of these routes, which I thought was a good thing. Unfortunately, at that time, then the price of diesel started going up, so we saved $1 million, but with the diesel going up, it still hurt us in the long run. One of the other things I took an aggressive approach on was 2 years ago. I went to our sheriff, Mike Scott, and said, Mike, I'd like to have a full-time canine unit for Lee County School District. And he said, done. I said, wow, that's simple. So now we have a full-time canine unit that goes to different schools throughout the day, every day. Unexpectedly, nobody knows when they're coming. The principal gets an hour's notice before they show up. And it's helped out quite a bit, and I really appreciate the joint effort with Lee County Sheriff on this one. The other thing I've done, and I just did this just recently, I'm sure you guys heard of it, everybody else has, other than the testing part, but I just recently implemented in our school district where we will be teaching about 9/11 or acknowledgement for 10 minutes every year on the anniversary of 9/11 or the closest school date of 9/11. One of our teachers called in, said they was not allowed to teach about 9/11, and because it wasn't on the test. Well, I put a motion out there and it passed, and it got national attention just recently because people couldn't believe that they was being told not to teach about it, and I thought that was something that was very important for our students. I lost somebody there myself, so I thought it was something that we need to remember why we're in this war. So,
Could you just come back real quickly on the canine unit and say what the purpose of those searches are?
the purpose of the search is one of the things that I found out, and I can use a good demonstration. Kids were taking pens like this, and they was putting a joint inside of it and selling it to other kids for $5. Now, when you see things like that, you know, you're not going to think anything of it as a teacher. This kid just handed you a pen. Well, the purpose of this is to find these kids that are pushing drugs or they're bringing weapons in, because this K9 unit can actually sniff gunpowder. And to make these schools safer, because a kid deserves to have a safe and drug-free environment for educational purposes.
How long have those canine units been on the job?
Now 2 years.
Have they resulted in a lot of exposures? And
Oh yeah. Some people wasn't thrilled about it. There was some pushback with some schools because they didn't want a bad reputation in their school. And as I told them, it might give you a bad reputation right up front, but in the long run, it's going to give us a better reputation all the way around.
And Don, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You said gunpowder. Did you mean also drugs? They can smell drugs as well as?
They can smell drugs and gunpowder.
Got it. Okay. Gotcha.
So it's the canine unit is remarkable. It really is. I've seen a demonstration of this canine unit who could actually smell gunpowder, explosives, and drugs.
Okay.
And a very, very friendly dog. You walk up and play with them, play tug of war with them. I was very impressed. It's a very impressive canine unit that the sheriff has.
would it have been the case that early on they found a lot of pens like that and a lot of things going like that, and now the numbers decreased? Do you think
Now the
it's-
numbers have been steadily decreasing.
Those numbers exist somewhere, do you know?
Yeah, I know we get reports on it yearly.
Okay.
But it has been remarkable that what they've been doing, and the handling of the canine unit is just, again, remarkable. I can't thank Mike Scott enough, because again, I have kids in there. I want to make sure these kids have a safe, drug-free environment. You know, and there's a war on drugs. We all know that. And people pretend that it's not there, they're wrong. It's there. You know, I can't protect these students outside of school, but I can do everything I can while they're in school.
Is this in all schools or like just in high schools and middle
All
schools?
schools.
Or okay.
All schools.
Okay.
There's now the one thing I have not been able to get to push through, which I wanted them to actually go into all buildings for the school district as well. You know, that's whether it's bus compound, school board's office. I don't care. You know, to me, that's one thing I wanted them to do extra, was to walk through all buildings as well. You know, drugs and adults, that it can still happen, and I thought that we need to know that.
The last time you ran, one of your big concerns was the time that students are spending on buses. How has that changed, or has it changed for the better? You mentioned that the routes being consolidated, but has that resulted in shorter bus trips?
That has re-shorted, and it's not as short as I'd like them, but you don't hear about the 2.5-hour bus trips. You don't hear about it at all anymore. You don't see parents out there complaining. We still have longer bus trips than what I'd like due to school choice, which, again, we all know where I stand on school choice. That's no secret. I'm against it. But be that as it may, I've watched, because we've consolidated a lot of these bus stops, we have shorter bus runs now. And that's a good thing. Kids aren't spending 2.5 hours on a bus. You know, the longest I've heard of so far, and this is what I've not researched it recently, but an hour and a half. It's better than 2.5 hours any day.
You mentioned your opposition against school choice. Do you think Lee County has come along far enough since the ruling came down that was required, that Lee County can let go of that now?
I think we need to start looking into letting go of it. And I think there's creative ways that we can do it. When I first ran, I suggested to keep school choice in high schools and then to go back to neighborhood schools for elementary and middle. My opponent, matter of fact, he's actually just tried to use that idea at a forum we was at not too long ago, which was kind of ironic because it was my idea 4 years ago and he's trying to use it. But he's the one who was implementing school choice. He's the one who brought it in the way we know it today. Another idea that I've just recently thought about and I'm getting ready to bring up was to make it a little easier. So right now, if you live within 2 miles of the school, you get preference. I want to make that less stringent. Make it 5 miles to give people, you know, because right now we've lost a lot of people because from Hertz, they moved to Collier because of school choice here. You know, and that says a lot when these people are not wanting to move here because of school choice. We need to start looking at ways, and that's why I continue to bring ideas, how to make it a little easier for the people. I've heard of families moving right across the street from an elementary school and still not being able to get into that school. I mean, right across the street, literally, and not having to be bused. I have an issue with that. You know, these kids deserve, that's why they chose to live there. You know, that's, most families look at the schools and what's closest to them. And when we're busing students all over the place, because it's not a school choice now, it's called a lottery system. I hate to tell everybody that, but that's what it really boils down to, is a lottery system.
You mentioned that the Hertz employees would move to Collier because of school choice. Are you confident it was because of school choice, or was it because of the overall school system, however you want to define that?
School choice.
Specifically school choice that made
a lot of them, school choice. I won't say 100% of them all did that because of it, but I know a lot of them I've spoke to on personal notes. Who've called me, emailed me, said, look, we're not moving there because of school choice. Can you explain to me a little bit more about it before we make a rash decision? You know, and come to find out, they still moved to Collier County. Well, that's ridiculous, you know. And you can go listen to them. You know, we had a lot of interviews with different people, tried to explain to them about it, and they still opted to move to Collier. Not all of them, but enough of them where it hurt us.
Does that also point to the need for another high school in South Lee County, say in Bonita Springs?
No, I think because we still have 8,000 to 10,000 open seats, and that's elementary, middle, and high. But I don't want to commit to building 2 high schools is what they're talking about right now. That's $56 million apiece, you know, without exhausting all our other options. I know my opponent's he's been pushing the P3 quite heavily lately. And I'm not convinced P3 with a private-public sector partnership is actually the right way to go, because there's too many loopholes. In order to do the P3, some of these organizations that want to help want us to basically give them the land that we own. So until I can see actual contracts and understand this a lot better, I've actually gone to other meetings. Cape Coral had a meeting about this, and I went and attended that just to learn and educate myself a little more, because I want to make sure before I make any decision I've made the best education decision I can on this, because that's not my money, it's the taxpayers' money.
As far as capital needs of the district, do you think the district is doing a good enough job in terms of planning ahead for schools that will be needed?
I think we're actually doing a decent job. I mean, we still have a lot of things that we need to look at. We have a lot of unfunded mandates, as they call it. But I also have to look at the past 4 years. We've still been hurting for the past 4 years in Lee County School District. You don't hear of massive layoffs. You don't hear about you know, schools closing right now. Our budget when I first got on the school district was almost $1.5 billion. It's $1.2 billion now. We've steadily declined, but we've managed to keep the doors open in these schools. And that is not just the board, that has a lot to do with the superintendent, the personnel, the administrators, all of us working together, trying to come up with creative ideas how to maintain a great education system. And that's what we've done. A year and a half ago, we did what we call a zero-based budgeting, something I pushed for, along with my fellow colleague, Mr. Scott. And we finally got it pushed through, which basically we took the whole budget, completely tore it down, and looked at what we needed, not what we wanted, and then went from there. So that was something else I was very proud of that we finally got to push through. And we did it without massive layoffs.
You know, obviously, the big issue that Lee County has become known over in recent weeks is the decision on doing away with testing. Can you walk us through your position on that, please?
There's a tough one. How many hours do you guys got? My decision on that was, originally, I'm the one who opted my own kids out of the testing. High-stakes testing. There's a reason why I did. I've watched a lot of kids over the years who start losing the passion for the education, for going to school. They don't want to go to school anymore because of all these tests. We give 160 tests annually. Now, that's a lot of tests to be given these students. We spend around 40% of our time on tests. Not educating, tests. And then we're also teaching how to take tests. You know, I'm not against the testing at all. Don't get me wrong. We have to have some type of measurement there. But we're testing these kids so much that we're not educating them like we're supposed to. Around 92 tests are state mandated tests. The other 58 are district. You know, we opted out some of our district tests, but we didn't really opt out. We gave it the authority to the teachers to give them when they needed to for the district tests. And that was the purpose, to give the teachers back the educational part of it. It's their job to teach these students. Now we have to start looking at these state mandated tests. Are they summative tests? Are they formative tests? Are they good diagnostic tests? Some of these tests that we give these students, you never see the results, ever. None of us do. So if Jimmy and Johnny did poor in math, you don't know if they did poor in the division, or the subtraction, or the multiplication. All you know is they did poor in math, so they have to remediate. Well, so we're going to spend the whole time remediating with everything. Well, that's a formative test, not a summative test. And these tests right there, they're flawed. We know they're flawed. The statistics show that they're flawed. The new air test that's coming online, some of the statistics that I've seen about it recently, it's got a 70% failure rate. How does that help our students? FCAT 2.0. We have 2,500 students right now who had to retake this test. They're seniors. The same test they took in 10th grade that they've had to take 5, 6, 7 times now. There's errors with that test. We've put so much emphasis on the testing, you know, and I've suggested, and even our board attorney has made the comment that I was correct, that we can use a SAT or ACT test in lieu of using the FCAT 2.0. He said, you're correct. Florida statute does give us that authority and that right. And he sent it to us in an email. So that's one of the things that I suggest that we use instead of the FCAT 2.0. And as of this day, we still have not completed the load test on the new air test that's coming out. And Florida statute requires us to do that before we give that test. We don't even know if it's going to pass now. We haven't even got the test to do the load test on it. We won't get it until November sometime. And my worry, if it does not pass the load test, what do we do? If we don't have some type of contingency plan, what do we do for these students? We're failing them. We need to be more proactive, and that's why I've taken such a strong stance on this testing. I've seen where it's hurt these students, personally.
You seem to have, there's a lot of support, I think, for the concept of the over-testing and too much emphasis on the high-stakes tests. But had the course you laid out initially passed, where we're just opting out of all of this, what was the plan going forward? How are you going to meet the various mandates that were hinged on a lot of these tests?
Well, and that's why I brought up that ACT and ACT and the Iowa test is another test that we could use. It's the superintendent's job and her cabinet to formulate the plans and bring it forth to the board. The board sets the policy. You know, a lot of people come out there and say, well, you didn't have a plan. Well, the board sets the policy. The superintendent comes back and says, this is what we're doing to adhere to that policy.
Okay. So you felt it was your job to set the policy, whatever the plan was going to be was going to have to come out of the superintendent's office.
That was going to be up to her office, and her, you know, she has the staff. She has some of the best staff or administrators in the state of Florida, some of the brightest, and I can say that wholeheartedly. But it was her job to come up with a plan and explain to us what she was going to do. Now, she has looked at different things and brought it to us recently, which I'm very impressed with what she's been doing, and it's a good thing. But I still think we have a lot of work to do. Now, hindsight being 2020, if I could have made the motion myself, I wanted to opt out of the air test completely and just kind of leave the other test alone for the time being. But again, I thought, again, now that I look back, I would have rather been a little bit more specific on the test that we opted out of than just kind of broad across the board. But we still, you know, a lot of people yell and scream and say, well, these kids aren't going to graduate. They're talking about the 2,500 that still might not graduate right now because of some of these tests. What do you do then? Well, that's why I brought different ideas of what we can do. And then some people said, well, then how are they going to pay for those tests? Well, there's different ways that we can offer to help pay for it. If they're on free and reduced lunch, they don't have to pay for it. By opting out of some of these other tests, the district could pick up the cost on some of these tests and help these students out. And you're cutting out the middleman, because if they're going to go to college, they have to take these tests anyways.
I want to come back to the comment you made about setting policy, and it was the superintendent's job to do this. Refresh my memory, did the board give her a time period to come up with a plan before enacting the opt-out test, or was it immediate, now go come up with a plan?
It was immediate, now go come up with a plan. She wasn't thrilled about it, but I also had a lot of trust and faith that she could come up with something very quickly. Now, again, that's why I said, you know, looking back at hindsight's 2020, if it was my motion, and I had a motion that was already laid out in front of me at the time, just to opt out of the air test. Mr. Scott put his motion out there and I seconded it. And we had a lot of discussion over it, a lot of great discussion. And we still continue to have discussion over these tests. And it's even gotten the governor's race heated up a little bit over these tests, just in case anybody hasn't paid attention to that one recently.
In terms of the superintendent carrying this forward, how much discussion was there? Obviously, the board members couldn't have that discussion, but was she blindsided when she was told, okay, now go come up with a plan to do this? Okay.
Not at all. She has said to me on several different occasions, she knew this was coming. She knew something was coming. She knew the testing is a huge issue. I've had lengthy conversations. This is not something that I've done over the past few months. This is something that I've been doing for probably a year and a half now. I've been on several different talk show radios discussing this and doing my research on a lot of these testing, because I wanted to make sure what we do is in the best interest of these students. And when you start looking at all the data that's put in front of you, you really, really have to start to wonder, are these tests helping the students, or are they just a money maker for somebody else out there? I'm starting to think that it's a money making scheme for somebody else out there, making a lot of money off the backs of our students.
Overall,
Going forward now, say you're reelected, what's the proper course? Is this a matter for the legislature to take up, and if so, what's your strategy to work on the legislature to get things right, or is it something the school board needs to take another run at in another forum?
We need to take both. That's the best way to answer. Both. We need to actually go to our legislators, and I've scheduled meetings with some of our legislators. I've talked to them. I have one scheduled for next week with one of our legislators to discuss this same issue with them. And the board needs to take a stance on it as well and continue to work with these groups. Now, that night that we opted out of the test, I seen something that night that I probably will never see again in my life. I mean, probably the most remarkable thing I've ever seen, to be honest, sitting on that board. When I look in that audience, I seen Democrats out there. I seen Republicans out there, Tea Party and Libertarians, all on the same side of an issue, working together to get rid of this. You're talking 400 people showing up, working together. That speaks volume of what these people, how passionate these people are about this, when they all can put aside the political issues and work together for the same cause. And they're still working together. You go to any of these groups, opt out Orlando, opt out Lee County, opt out Collier County, opt out Miami. I'm involved in every single one of these groups. I have got emails as far away from Washington from different people encouraging us to continue working on this. I've talked to people from Canada. I even recently did a documentary on this, an international documentary about the testing and also the recess part 2 weeks ago about this. This is a huge issue, and it's growing legs. And we all need to work together, the community, our media, the board, and we need to reach out to our, our state legislators and start coming up with more solutions, more workable solutions of how we can help these students and make sure they do have a great education. You always hear the school district talk about being a world-class school system. Being a world-class is stepping up and above what everybody else is doing. That's, to me, is being a world-class, not following what everybody else does, but charging a new path for this education system. And that's what the Lee County School District has been doing.
Overall, how do you think the superintendent is doing?
I'll give her a C. There's things that I say I think that she could do better, and there's things that I think she's done excellent. Okay, so I'll give her a B. How about that? That's because there is some things out there that she's done excellent on.
Like, can you give us an example or two?
She's brought her staff together to work on different parts of the testing or the education. She's eliminated some of these tests already. So she has done a lot of good things with the community. She's gone out and listened to what they've had to say. She's brought the strategic plan in an ungodly amount of time. She's put it together. And that's something to me that it was a tough choice or a tough job for her to do, and she did it. And some of the things that I'd like to see her do better is actually communication with the board. I think that's one of her weakest parts. The communication's not always there what it needs to be. Sometimes I have to actually pick up your paper and read it to find out things that's going on. Sometimes I think you guys know before I do.
What distinguishes you between you and your opponent?
Well, there's a lot of things that distinguishes me. I continue, in my past 4 years, I go to several different communities, meetings as far as community meetings, and I've listened to what the people have to say. I'm just a blue-collar worker out there. I represent a part of Lee County that board's never had, the blue-collar worker, the common man. I'm not a politician. We did have a superintendent that left when I was on the board, and he got a handshake and pat on the back and said good luck. My opponent had a superintendent who clearly violated his contract and still voted to give him almost $500,000 of the taxpayers' money, his golden parachute to leave. I don't know about you guys, but where can I find me a job to quit it that I can quit and get almost $500,000? So what distinguishes me, I listen to the people. To this day, I get phone calls from different people, teachers, parents. I've even had students that's graduated who needed help, who I've given them my card and they've called and asked for help. That's what distinguishes me. I go out to the communities. I was invited to a political event back in May, and on the same day I was invited to go to a school for a fundraiser. Now, the political event, I might have got some campaign contributions from, some votes, or I could have went to the fundraiser and get none of that. Well, part of the fundraiser for the school was to sit in the dunk tank. You guys want to see the pictures of me sitting in the dunk tank? That's what I chose, because it's about the kids. It's not about my politics, it's about these kids. And these kids paid good money to throw balls and dunk me in that tank and laugh. A couple of the 6-year-olds kept running up, punching it, and knocking me in the tank. Those are the things I do. That's what separates me different from most anybody. 'Cause I'll do it for the kids.
We're about out of our half-hour allotment here. Are there any final questions any of the board members have? Any last things you want to cover, Don, that we haven't?
Sure. One of the things I do want to cover is November 4th, when you vote for Don Armstrong, you're voting for the common man. You're voting for your voice to be heard on the board, somebody who remembers why he's there. In the past 4 years, I've never forgotten why I've been there. It's been about the kids, the community, and listening to what people has to say. Even when people come to me and they don't like what I've had to say, I've sat down and listened to them. I'm not perfect. I make my mistakes, and I know it. I'm also man enough to, yeah, you're right, I made a mistake, and I'll take my lumps when I need to. But I've always been there. This is the community that I love. I was born and raised here, and I'd be humbled to have everybody's vote on November 4th to continue working on the Lee County School Board.